The war's not going well for them. But at the same time, that makes us dangerous because they are withdrawing troops from what are already very tenuously held battle lines in the Donbass, especially to fight this. Russia doesn't seem to have yet withdrawn as many troops to deal with this. So Ukraine seems to be making itself more vulnerable.
On the Ukrainian side, of course, there was the invasion of Kursk in Russia. So quite a stunning development in the Russian war on Ukraine. Ukraine invades Russia. That's obviously not an inherently bad thing. Ukraine was attacked. They're fighting back. But for reasons we'll talk about, I guess, it may suggest that Ukraine goes further than Washington would like it to sometimes. And then the other Ukraine story, of course, is we got more evidence this week that Kiev was behind the bombing of the Nord Stream pipeline back in September 2022. At least there was some reporting to that effect, most prominently from the Wall Street Journal. So we can talk about that. The more I think about it, I'm a little skeptical of some of the details, but maybe we'll get into that.
Maybe we could talk about the Ukraine thing a little bit in terms of, well, first of all, why did Ukraine do it? Theories differ. I think it was to some extent just an impulse to change the narrative. The war's not going well for them. But at the same time, that makes us dangerous because they are withdrawing troops from what are already very tenuously held battle lines in the Donbass, especially to fight this. Russia doesn't seem to have yet withdrawn as many troops to deal with this. And so Ukraine seems to be making itself more vulnerable. And that would seem to be bad for Ukraine. I mean, another reason Ukraine may have in mind is if they plan to hang on to this territory, it could be a bargaining chip when, if and when negotiations happen, which they could maybe swap for some territory that Russia occupies. But I still think this is going to put such negotiations further off into the future. It's just Putin's going to, one way or another, respond. People, as we know, I've heard a lot of people who know Russia pretty well say they think this will almost certainly help Putin's recruiting, which is what he needs right now. And that could ultimately work to Ukraine's disadvantage. But anyway, I think however distant peace talks may have seemed, I think they are now more distant. This is just going to add a whole new chapter that has to get played out.
Yeah, I can see that because Putin, are you thinking Putin he doesn't want to go into negotiations from a position of weakness? So that's one reason that this might push off negotiations. I was going to recommend that we talk about this in terms of the pros and cons from the Ukrainian point of view, because I do think that there are pros and cons. I guess it's interesting because you're making it seem like that is a con, and I guess that's right. Because I was thinking of kind of humiliating Putin as on the pro side, like a positive that comes out of this, because
I don't know. It seems to me that 25 years of humiliating Putin got us to where we are today, but that's another story.
No, definitely. And he might want to lash out. But this was a very substantial military operation, and it's the first invasion. Ukraine has kind of done stuff inside Russian territory. And there's been some raids that have crossed the border, but this is on a whole other level. It's actually been a little difficult to find out how many troops are involved here, but it's a substantial amount.
Thousands.
So this maybe even up to 10,000 or something. Initial reports were saying hundreds, but it's more than that. This is the first invasion of Russia since Hitler invaded and, Operation Barbarossa. And that really does, I think, implicate the legitimacy of Putin's regime. I'm not going to say that his regime's going to collapse and the walls are closing in, because we've heard that many times before, and I don't want to participate in that discourse. But this is so fundamental that I think Putin probably needs to be careful in how he handles this. But you're right that humiliating him could have negative repercussions.
Well,
and you're right that this is a good recruitment measure. Russia was increasing payments to new recruits because they're having a troop shortage actually. not to the same extent as Ukraine, but they need more troops to maintain their positions in the east and to advance as far as they want to. I mean, this might help with that because, a lot of young men are going to see that their homeland is being invaded and they might feel called to
Definitely
defend it.
Look, I think you're right that it humiliates Putin in front of his home audience. The question is does that lead to behavior we're going to like? I think that means he's got to, in some sense, escalate now. And, either move heaven and earth to get these troops, the Ukrainian troops, out of Russia, which will mean killing a lot of Ukrainians probably, or, doing other more dramatic things, hitting more cities with missiles more indiscriminately or something. I mean, I don't think the nuclear threat goes up that much. I mean, I think, as we say in the newsletter, whenever the probability of nuclear war goes up by a fraction of a percentage point, it's worth thinking about. And this definitely does move the situation closer to what is justified under Russian nuclear doctrine, what justifies the use of nuclear weapons, because it's now a threat on Russian territory. And so arguably a, quote, existential threat to Russia as their nuclear doctrine has it, but still, I don't think that's going to happen. But I just think the war is bound to, in some sense, get bigger. And I think ultimately, I mean, again, Ukraine can't win this war realistically, right? It's like they are running out of people, and in a way that Russia is not. I mean, Russia may be having some recruiting problems because they don't want to resort to a draft. But I think this may solve those problems, and not just through making recruiting easier, but maybe in justifying an actual draft. In any event, Russia's just got a lot more people who can join the armed forces. Now, if you want to come up with an optimistic scenario about how this plays out, I guess it could be, well, this is not the one Ukraine would choose, but one thing I'd say is that, Russia is making progress in the Donbass. And this seems to be, if anything, accelerating that. And, the thing about the Donbass, of the kind of the four provinces that Russia claims it has annexed and that it has some significant number of troops occupying, the two in the Donbass are the ones that are kind of dearest to its heart. I mean, they had the highest number of ethnic Russians to begin with who were disenchanted with Ukrainian rule. There was probably the most indigenous support there for the Russian invasion and so on. So you might say, and it's the part of Ukraine that Ukraine's probably, if it has to let go of something, it's probably happiest about letting go of, precisely because of that composition. So you might imagine a situation where, this war's probably not going to end until Russia controls all of Luhansk and Donetsk. Maybe this accelerates that because Ukraine is relocating its troops. And meanwhile, it gives Ukraine something that you can use to bargain for parts of the other two provinces.
If they can hold on to the territory, that's a major caveat. If they can
hold on to the territory. And again, I don't know. If they can't, I'm not sure I see the point, because they're gonna lose. They're already losing troops and equipment there. I mean, it's but they're gonna lose. If they try to hold it and fail, they're going to lose a lot. Yeah.
And humiliating Putin isn't the only ostensible positive that's actually connected to a negative. I mean, a lot of people, when they're talking about the positives here, mention that the invasion of Russia, this offensive, will force Russia to divert troops from the front lines in eastern Ukraine, which are apparently kind of collapsing, in a gradual way. But that obviously has a corollary, which it diverts Ukrainian troops and Ukrainian material as well. And these are, as I understand it, they're well-trained elite forces. They didn't want to send a bunch of scrubs and to Russia.
Right.
Like, this is a difficult
Whereas Russia is
operation.
sending a certain number of scrubs to counteract this.
Hmm.
And, the other thing is so far Ukraine's getting the worst of the deal in terms of manpower diverted from the what was previously the battleground and still is. I also heard somebody noting that, in terms of Ukraine holding the territory, and this was a Ukrainian veteran talking about this, who's very sympathetic to Ukraine and the war effort, but saying that, the way the technology has changed the war, making life hard on occupying Ukrainian troops is not as hard as it used to be. It's
Hmm.
like you establish one setup with these first person view drones and you torment the Ukrainian troops and assets with them. And by the way, Ukraine is now in a place where they don't have access to Starlink. Their communications are much harder. They have
Hmm.
to use means that are more readily, compromised and eavesdropped on by Russia. And Russia had already been having electronic warfare success against like Ukrainian drones and so on. So anyway, it's just this person was also saying the terrain here is favors like counterattack and insurgency. It's not like wide open fields. It's like hills and forests where the people who know the territory can be lurking.
Hmm. So, like,
So,
they're exposed to ambush, basically.
mhm.
I mean, if it's forested and if it's very densely forested, that could be an advantage in terms of drones, like that drone issue. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Although
it's
those,
kind of hard to say. I don't know how the offense, because military analysts always talk about whether the offense or the defense has the advantage. I mean, in this case, it kind of seems like they went into like undefended territory and did secure it, and not in an insubstantial amount. I mean,
yeah. No,
everything's
they caught him by
relative, but
surprise for sure. It was a well
mhm.
done thing.
But I guess they have to think, and I guess you can't really say they are now playing defense there. Like, they're still kind of on the offense, because when you think about their like supply lines and stuff, I mean, they're an invading army that's probably pretty vulnerable. I'd say another possible upside that you hear, and I don't know if this is to some extent trolling, is that this could create a buffer zone, which could make missile attacks from Russia more difficult. I say it's possibly trolling because sometimes people have said that Russia wants to make all of Ukraine or eastern Ukraine into a buffer zone. So it's kind of interesting to hear the Ukrainians say that about Russian territory. Any
I-
other down? Go
Well,
ahead.
the other upside here from Ukraine's point of view is it's a huge morale booster for the
Hmm.
soldiers and the populace because they had just been taking a beating. And so that's good. And conceivably, it could aid a little in enlistment in the Ukrainian army. I mean, right now, there seems to be a fair number of young guys who spend their time evading
Hmm.
the draft. But it just seems to me like, in retrospect, it will probably look like it was just like a mood elevator. It worked for a while. I don't see how it solves the long term problems, but it's a wide open situation.